Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
One day in his life, a husband saw some unexpected photos of his wife with today's story with a similar plot. Enjoy watching it. There were days that should never have happened. Today was just such a day. In fact, the last few hundred days shouldn't have happened either. Life used to be good, fun, and exciting. There was something to look forward to every day. I woke up in the morning and happily went to work. If I had a new project, I was happy for the challenge. I looked forward to getting home after work to spend time with my lovely fiancée. The weekends were a time of pure bliss, walks in the park, picnics, camping, hiking, and passionate love. It all ended a while ago, and the saddest thing is that I'm not even sure when the good times turned bad. Maybe it was during our vacation in CML, the night I woke up to go to the bathroom and found my wife not in bed. I went down to the pool, thinking maybe she couldn't sleep, and went to relax and read by the pool. What I found was a long line of men waiting to enter the women's shower. She stood at the head of this line, arranging intim. I always knew she was frivolous, but this was too much. Perhaps it happened that night when she went out with her friends. Who could have known that she would become ill and return home early to find me in front of Cindy, our neighbor? You're probably asking why the hell we're still together. Well, family therapy can be a wonderful thing. We had an excellent therapist and were able to work through each of these incidents amicably. We discussed everything and came to the conclusion that both of us were wrong in each case and reconciled. Life was great for a while after the consultations. Everything seemed to be back to normal. Little did I know that she had learned to hide her adventures better and had not stopped them, as she assured me. This morning, while looking for a tie, I found an envelope with photos of our wedding day on the top shelf of the closet. I thought they were all in the album, but I immediately understood why these photos were not there. There she was in a wedding dress, something blue, something new, something rented. What caught my attention was my beautiful bride satisfying my friend. I would have called this morning to say I had died, but I had a very important presentation to make to the executive team. I worked on this deal for over a year, practically on my own, and finally agreed to represent the client. This deal would guarantee my position in the company for the rest of my life, if I so chose. Raising several $100 million into a company's coffers seems to have that effect. My presentation was ready and excellent, if I may say so myself. Screw PowerPoint, I went straight to the video, a DVD, to be precise, with hired actors who explained the proposal step by step, focusing, of course, on the financial gain. I paid dearly for professional graphics and a killer soundtrack. Well, I should have known it was all in vain. My main problem at work was with a guy named Brad. Regardless of my actions, he tried to outdo me. If possible, he would steal my ideas as his own. At the first opportunity, he talked badly about me to the executive team every day. Oh, by the way, did I mention that he's the father of that girl next door? It seems like the consultations didn't have much of an impact on him, which is really strange. Apparently, the knowledge that I had deflowered his sweet daughter left him with a bad taste towards me. I can't imagine why. There I stood, ready to turn on my presentation when Brad walked into the conference room. I should have picked up the nearest heavy object and smashed his worthless skull. When I saw his grin, I was still thinking slowly, considering what I had already experienced this morning, and I didn't have time. It looked like he had done some research on this new client I had been working so hard on. He happily laid everything out on the table for everyone to see. There was nothing here that I hadn't seen before, but there was some information I really didn't want the production team to see. In our business, the first impression a company makes is everything. It doesn't matter what actually happens. If someone believes something crazy, then it becomes the new truth. Bradley began convincing the big bosses that my new client would be morally bad for our business. He discovered that one of the multinational giant's subsidiaries produced erotica. I already knew this and pointed out that the income from this division was less than 1% of my client's total income and that the questionable erotica was distributed only in the European market. Like I said, first impressions are everything. The council was made up of guys in their 70s who hadn't had a night since Nixon was president. I was quickly and rather rudely informed that they were extremely disappointed with my performance and that my services were no longer required. Did I mention Brad is a jerk? I had no choice but to return home. I decided to drink a few beers to try and drown my sorrows, maybe watch some TV and just be a couch potato for a few days. Maybe Cindy from next door would come over in her cheerleader outfit. A person needs to have something to hope for in life. When I pulled up to my house, I knew something was wrong. On the street in front of my house, there were not one, not two, but 3 municipal garbage trucks. I parked a few houses down from mine and walked slowly toward the house, peering into every window I passed. I found the answer in the playroom. There she was in all her glory, with 6 scavengers. They were having an intimate. My life is getting better and better, I thought. I left the window and quickly returned to the car, taking out a digital camera from the glove compartment. I went back to the playroom window and took as many pictures as I could. Some of them turned out really good. I wanted to document this for the court. They kept at it for quite some time, and on some sick and twisted level, I was impressed by their endurance. As the happy workers began to get dressed, I headed back to the car and drove across town to a club I knew was open at that time of the morning. Pink Pussycat was a mid-level nightclub that I visited occasionally as a bachelor. The dancers weren't the best, but they weren't the worst either. The girls were always friendly and didn't mind sitting and talking to customers, not even demanding money for a couple of dances at the table. There was none of the arrogant demeanor that prevailed in most higher-class clubs. Some of the girls were exceptionally beautiful but did not inherit the goddess gene along with their beauty. I hadn't been to the club for quite some time, but it was obvious that not much had changed since then. The place was clean, with few customers at this time of day. I headed to the darkest corner of the room. I needed to be alone, think, and plan how to get rid of the useless trash. I called my wife before I could get settled. A girl had already approached me, asking what I would like to drink. She made me forget about my bad day for a moment. She introduced herself as Crystal and was absolutely charming, about 155 centimeters tall, with long brown hair, striking blue eyes, high, firm breasts that would fit perfectly in the palm of one hand, and full round buttocks that could bounce coins off. "Would you like some company?" she asked, returning with my beer. "Maybe later." "I'd like to relax a little," I replied. "Okay, don't forget about me," she said with a wink and a smile before walking away, her perfect 5th place wiggling. I sat and watched some of the girls dance, just relaxing and trying to calm my racing mind. After an hour or so, I felt calmer and began to think a little more clearly. The first thing I needed to do was take care of the photos. I took my laptop out of my bag and placed it on the small table in front of me. This place was frequented by business clients, so a laptop here was not an unusual sight. I took the memory card from the camera out of my pocket and inserted it into the slot on the side of the laptop. Computers were fine, of course, cameras were prohibited. After I downloaded the photos, I went through each one, cropped them, corrected the color, and enhanced them as needed. I was almost done when Crystal came and sat down next to me. I didn't notice her approach and didn't have time to minimize the screen. "What are you doing?" she asked, surprise in her eyes. I decided it would be best to tell the truth. It might help if I spoke up. I told her what I had seen that morning at my house in the most frank detail I could. I could have given her a smoother, PG-13 version, but I wanted to see if I could shock her. To my surprise, her expression didn't change much except that she looked more serious. However, other things were definitely changing. "What are you going to do now?" she asked with genuine concern. "Well," I replied, "I'll probably go home, show her the photos, and throw her out the door." Crystal thought for a minute. "I have a better idea," she said with a grin. "How about you go home and act like everything is fine? Don't tell her that you lost your job or that you caught her this morning. Try to act normal over the next few days. Come here whenever you usually would be at work. See if you can't catch her and get more photos for evidence before you do anything. The more evidence you have, the better argument you'll have. She'll get most of what you have if you go to court with only these photographs." I met a guy who was a divorce lawyer, and he told me a lot. I had to admit it sounded like a good idea. "I know she will want to seduce me," I said frankly. "I really don't want to go near her without knowing what she might have caught this morning," I said. "Just tell her you don't feel well, have a headache or something. It might work, but only for a day or two. If it takes longer, you can go on a business trip for a week or so, she said. If she's as available as you say, she'll have something planned almost every day, so getting more evidence won't be a problem. Okay, let's see what happens. I'm sure the easily accessible one will be busy, I replied, laughing. She's not available, Crystal said seriously. I'm such a stupid. Girls want to have a good time for money, but in a good way. Idiots ruin people's lives when they're having fun. That's a big difference. I can't believe you just told me you're available, I laughed. Crystal winked at me and said, oh, but it's true. See those two girls? She pointed across the room to the main stage, where two of the cutest girls I'd ever seen were rubbing up against each other. This is Brittany and Kayla. They're my roommates, and guess what? They're approachable too. You seem like a really good guy who's had a rough time. I'll go talk to them and see if we can set something up to cheer you up and distract you from your problems. She paused, then quickly added, if you want, of course. What? I exclaimed, not believing my ears. Like I said, if you want, we'll make you forget about the man. Trust me, Crystal said, sitting there with a very sweet, very devious, very cute smile. She clearly enjoyed the fact that she shocked me when I failed to shock her. To say I was stunned is an understatement. I didn't know what to think. This was a completely new experience for me, and I couldn't help but think about what it would be like if I accepted her proposal. Wouldn't I be becoming like my wife? Wouldn't it be the same? Wouldn't that just be sinking to her level? My mind was racing again. Crystal's hand stroking my thigh and the two nymphs almost making out on stage didn't help clear my thoughts. Well, asked Crystal. I don't know, I mumbled. It sounds like heaven, but wouldn't that make me just like her? No, she replied. She cheated on you behind your back. You're just lucky you found out. Your marriage is over. You're suffering, and your mind is haunting you. You need to relax and understand that it's not your fault. It's her actions, not yours. Let us help you, please. She had a very hot look. I have to go dance now. I'll be back when I'm done, she said, giving me a kiss on the cheek and heading to the dressing room. Why did she have to wiggle that perfect fifth place when she knew I was watching? Damn it. I was left alone with my thoughts. My head was spinning. I'd be lying if I said the offer wasn't attractive. What guy in his right mind would say no to that? 3 beautiful young women offering their bodies for pleasure. Crystal was a beauty, and Brittany and Kayla were almost perfect. Just the thought of them already made me excited. I still wasn't sure it was a good idea. Crystal was announced next on stage about the same time I saw her leave the dressing room. She had changed into a costume that resembled an oriental dance outfit, if one could make such an outfit from just a few square inches of fabric. As she walked onto the stage, her music began. It sounded like the intersection of Enya and Evanescence. The music was melodic and exciting, with a powerful lower tone that was mesmerizing. The music could be exciting, but Crystal could wake up every dead dad and give them extremely wicked thoughts. My God, how could she move? I had seen a lot of good dancers over the years, but she made them all look like second-year ballet students. Her body was doing things I didn't even know existed. She made everything so damn nicely that I wanted to get up on stage and accept her offer. An explosion under my desk wouldn't have distracted my attention from her. She didn't dance to the music, she became the music. The music became her. There was no difference. Every movement, every gesture, every little detail was in perfect harmony. She still had that cute smirk on her face as she left the stage, and she barely took her eyes off me the entire time she was on stage. It seemed like she looked straight into my soul and could read my every thought and desire. Her performance ended too quickly. She waved at me and whispered, "Just a minute," as she left the stage. This minute seemed like an eternity. She returned to the table accompanied by 2 nymphs, all of whom had sly, nicely smiles. Suddenly, I felt like an exhibit at an exhibition. The girls sat around the table as Crystal introduced me to Brittany and Kayla. We exchanged greetings. Well, I was somehow able to mumble something that didn't disgrace me too much. I was still somewhere in orbit after watching Crystal dance. The three of them looked at me with questioning expressions on their faces. It was a little uncomfortable, to be honest. "What?" I asked, smiling and looking at each of them in turn. "Well, will you come to our house later?" they all asked together. I was left speechless. I couldn't believe that after a few minutes of talking, Crystal convinced them to offer themselves. "I'm still thinking," I somehow managed to answer. "There's a lot more to it than just fun for me." "We know," Kayla said. Crystal told us in a succinct way. "Just so you know, we all really feel sorry for you and would like to, help you. I have to go dance at the table, but I'll be back later." "That can help you decide," Crystal said. I couldn't help but see it. It was right in front of my face. Again, I was left speechless. I watched as Crystal and Brittany sat there, giggling at my predicament. They both pulled their chairs closer, each to one side of me. I felt a hand on each hip, each one much higher than is usually acceptable. She gave me one more kiss on the cheek before getting up and going to check on the other customers. Left alone with my thoughts, my mood quickly deteriorated again, remembering my wife's morning betrayal. I couldn't believe what she did. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. It was one thing to get drunk on vacation and find yourself in a compromising situation that could be forgiven with time. But having a night with half a dozen people in my home when I should have been at work was a different matter entirely. I suddenly realized that this must have required some preliminary preparation. It was planned for this specific day at this specific time. This was not a spontaneous impulse, it was something much more than just a casual connection. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became, and the more determined I was to find out what was really going on. I wanted to know if this was a one-off or something she did regularly. Suddenly, it occurred to me, why the hell wasn't she at work herself? The thought that came into my mind with this revelation was too disturbing to dwell on and was quickly pushed into the dark corners of my mind. I looked at the clock and realized that I only had a few hours left before I had to be home. I beckoned Crystal to my table and told her that I had things to do and was going to leave. I said I would think about her offer and let her know tomorrow. I started planning. My first stop was at a large shopping center on the outskirts of town. One of the stores sold everything a novice spy might need. I was upfront with the store owner, telling him that I suspected my wife of cheating and that I wanted the best technology to equip my home with audio and video surveillance. I looked at the available selection and chose several different types of cameras for different areas of the house. I purchased enough equipment to provide complete coverage in every room where communication could occur, as well as spare parts, cables, transmitters, receivers, and digital recording equipment. I left the store several $1,000s poorer. I sat in the shopping center parking lot and read the instructions, discovering that I could install the system and control everything using a computer. The advantage of this was that I could use the computer as a secure server to access and control the entire system from anywhere with an internet connection. Without going into technical details, it was quite convenient. I went to the mall again, this time looking for a good computer store. I found a small independent store a few doors down from the security and surveillance store I had visited earlier. Again, I was upfront with the seller and told him what was going on and what I expected from the system. I explained that I was not an expert, so I asked him to make everything as simple as possible for someone who didn't understand much about this, that is, for me. Luckily, the store had everything we needed in stock. The seller was very patient and explained exactly how everything needed to be set up to work the way I wanted it to. I bought everything I needed, making 2 trips to get it all into the car. It turned out to be a very expensive undertaking, but it was worth it. I took everything out of the packaging and managed to stash everything in the trunk before slowly starting to drive home. My plan was becoming clearer with every mile I drove. I arrived at my house at about the same time as usual so as not to arouse suspicion. When I arrived home, I noticed that my wife's car was not in its usual place in the garage. I walked into the kitchen and found a note on the table saying that she had gone out with friends for the evening and would be back late. I was wondering when I would be able to install the cameras and computer, and this was the perfect chance. I brought each item into the house and installed them one by one. In case she came home early for some reason, I installed 3 cameras in the playroom, covering every square inch of space. One was fixed, while the other 2 could rotate, tilt, and enlarge the image. All cameras were color and had sound. Surprisingly, none of them were larger than a button on my shirt when installed correctly. I went from room to room, setting up and aiming the cameras as needed. I had a few extras left over and put one in the office, even though I hadn't originally planned to place a camera there. I placed the other extra camera at the front door, facing out. Installing the cameras was the easy part. Concealing the wiring, providing power, and installing the transmitters proved a little more difficult. After several hours of work, the surveillance network, as the store owner called it, was ready. With good instructions and only a little swearing, I was able to hide the computer in a closet in the basement. Connecting the computer to the cameras and cable internet turned out to be relatively simple. I went upstairs and turned on my laptop. It was time to check the system. To say that I was surprised that everything worked as advertised would be a lie. Surprisingly, this is exactly what happened. I was able to access the server and switch between cameras. I could control the pan, tilt, and zoom of each one. With a little practice, I easily switched from room to room, from one view to another, shared multiple cameras on the same screen, and captured images. I was prepared for anything that could happen in any part of the house. A quick glance at the clock told me that she was due home soon. It would have been better if she hadn't seen any of this. I slowly walked around the house, checking each of the cameras. If you didn't know they were there, you would never notice them. There were a few that I knew were there, and I had to scramble to find the lens. After a quick dinner and a shower, I headed to bed. I wanted to be asleep when she got back so she wouldn't be tempted to try to start something. I felt her get into bed much later. I looked at my alarm clock and realized it was going to ring in less than 5 minutes. I noticed that she had taken a shower, although I did not hear it running. I got up and did my morning chores, noting that the shower was really dry. This raised even more questions. Was she busy cheating all night? How many men were there this time? It was completely out of control. If I hadn't had problems at work the previous day, I would never have known. I went through my normal morning routine as if I was going to work. I was actually going to work, just not the one my wife was thinking about. I decided at breakfast that my business trip would start today. I'll call her this evening and let her know that I'll be out of town, meeting with a new client for 2 weeks or so. With this decision in mind, I set off in the morning, driving through the city in search of a suitable hotel. I found exactly what I was looking for, just a few blocks from the Pink Pussycat. It was a high-end business hotel with underground parking to hide my car and a reasonably priced suite, 2 bedrooms with king-size beds, a living room, a private cinema, a fully stocked bar, and a jacuzzi large enough to host a small party. After examining the room, I turned on the laptop and connected to the internet. I checked my house, going through the rooms one by one, and found my wife still sleeping in bed. That's exactly how I started to think of her, as a real easy-to-get girl. As hectic as it was, it lived up to the script. I realized that the internet was probably how she found all these men, or they found her. Whatever it was, I turned on Google and soon compiled a long list of dating sites and sites offering call girls. It didn't take long to find her on every major site I checked. She was right at the top of the list. Her username was appropriately SutCount4U, and it was the same on every site I found. I was a little surprised by the graphic photos she posted on her profile. Her face was clearly visible in most of them. She didn't try to be discreet at all. I was really starting to feel like an idiot. How had I not noticed her behavior before? Here she was, the entire internet was filled with photographs of her with different groups of men. It seemed like she wanted to get caught, or maybe she didn't care. Her profiles also spoke for themselves. Hot, cute, intimate lover looking for you. I never have enough. One man will not satisfy me. I love night with several people, the more, the better. Ready for anything without restrictions. I'm serious. If you want to go crazy with a night, contact me soon. And at the bottom of the screen, in small print, request for a small donation. That was enough to understand. Now I had proof she really was frivolous in the most terrible sense of the word. I decided that these profiles would be helpful to my divorce lawyer when I was ready, so I printed out each profile along with the photos she posted. How I wish I could access these sites to get her emails, I thought to myself. I checked the house again and found her getting out of the shower. For a dirty girl, she had a really amazing body. I watched as she applied her makeup and went into the bedroom to get dressed. I have to admit, she looked pretty. The reason for her hot outfit soon rang the doorbell. As she put the finishing touches on her hair, I switched cameras and saw 3 guys at the front door, waiting for her to open it for them. Their eyes nearly popped out of their sockets when she did, and I couldn't blame them. I followed them around the house to the game room, where she directed the 3 men onto the couch while she climbed onto one of the bar stools. They sat and talked for a few minutes before one of the guys leaned forward and placed an envelope on the coffee table. I assumed it was her donation. I saw her look at the envelope and smile as she stood up and walked over to the stereo. She put in a CD and started dancing to the music. She might be a dancer, but she wasn't up to Crystal's level. She danced around the room, gradually getting closer to her 3 clients. When she was right in front of them, she continued to dance, occasionally giving the guys a glimpse of her slender body. I had to remind myself that I was collecting evidence and had to remain calm. If I hadn't restrained myself, I would have gone home within minutes to confront her. It was wild. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I'd seen her the day before with 6 guys, but considering what happened that morning with our wedding photos and at work, it wasn't exactly memorable. Now that my mind was clearer, it was just surreal. Here was my wife, who I thought had been faithful since our counseling, not only being unfaithful but also getting paid for it. I thought I was good at reading people, especially her. It was stunning to see how wrong I was. I watched, numb, as they had their way with my wife. After a few minutes of recovery, the guys got dressed and left the room. After a few minutes, she got up, got dressed, and walked over to the coffee table to pick up the envelope. I zoomed in on the camera and saw her open it and count the bills inside. I couldn't believe my eyes. She had just received $11,000 for giving away her body. After the initial shock, the question in my mind was, where did all this money go? I continued to follow her around the house as she headed into the master bathroom. She placed the envelope on the counter, undressed, and took a long shower. After the shower, she put on a robe, took the money, and went to the office. I watched as she pulled back a corner of the carpet and opened the safe on the floor. I felt more and more like an idiot. I didn't even know about the safe's existence. I was glad I had installed an additional camera in the office, especially since it was aimed to capture the combination to the safe. I continued to watch as she logged into her computer and accessed each of the dating and escort sites she was registered with. I noticed a few sites I hadn't found before and decided to check them out later. I was lucky again, I saw her password. It was the same on all sites. Looking at my watch, I noticed it was almost noon. Time had passed faster than I realized. I decided it was time to go on my business trip. I picked up my cell phone and called home, watching the annoyed look cross her face upon seeing the caller ID and hearing her say, "Damn, that's him." Now I was even more furious. This slippery woman was going to pay. I kept the conversation short and sweet, telling her that I had to fly into town later that afternoon on business. She didn't even show surprise, her voice didn't change, but I could see the smile on her face. She told me she was going to spend the day shopping with her friends and that I would not be expecting her at home when I returned to pack for my trip. Girlfriends, of course, just an excuse. She would probably have another group of guys. I should probably calm down before I get home in case she's still there. If I remain as angry as I am, I don't know if I can stop myself from kicking her out immediately. I walked into the Pink Pussycat and sat down at the same table I had sat at yesterday. Within minutes, Crystal, Brittany, and Kayla joined me, asking how things were going. It was good to talk it out and even funny to see their anger flare when I recounted this morning's adventure. Kayla was the first to speak up after I finished. "So where are we going to have fun on the flight?" she asked with a smile. I laughed at her bluntness and replied, "I've thought about this a lot, girls, and I think it would be a very bad idea to do anything before the divorce is official." They took it calmly, though with obvious disappointment. I explained that no matter how I thought about it, if I started having fun with them now, it would make me just like a cheap thrill, and I was better than that. They seemed to accept this explanation and then informed me that if I kept them waiting too long, they would screw me so hard that I wouldn't be able to walk for a week. I told them not to be so sure, maybe they wouldn't be able to walk. Kayla and Brittany got up to go dance, leaving me with Crystal, which I wasn't complaining about. We sat for a couple of hours, talking about everything under the sun. I found out she was a third-year student at a local university with excellent results, studying to become a criminologist. She was a very smart girl, well-read, literate, and absolutely charming in conversation. She was very down-to-earth and knew enough about various subjects to carry on an intelligent conversation. Eventually, the manager came over and told her it was time to get back to work. It was also time for me to go home, although I could no longer consider it home. I needed to pack my things. When I arrived at the house, they had already left, so I hurried upstairs and packed what I usually took on business trips. I never wanted to live here again, but I couldn't take everything with me. I carried my suitcases out to the car and then went into the office, pulled back the carpet, and opened the safe. I was completely stunned by what I found. The safe was about 2 feet in diameter and 3 feet deep. Inside were stacks and stacks of bills. I pulled out a few and saw that they were all $100 bills, tied in bundles. A quick calculation showed that it was over $750,000. My mind went blank and my body felt numb. The world around me seemed to spin. Some quick calculations told me that she had been with over 750 groups of men to accumulate that much money. Based on the fact that there were 3 men in each group, she had slept with over 2,250 strangers. If she had only done this for a year, that meant she averaged 2 groups a day. But given that it was the weekend, she must have been doing it more times a day or had been doing it longer than a year. I couldn't believe I never suspected anything. I had to stop thinking about such huge numbers or I would go crazy. I left home, half asleep, automatically heading through the city to the hotel. A sudden thought nearly caused me to faint from pure terror. I realized that during this entire time, while she had been doing this, I had been having a night with her. God knows how many times I had been intimate with her while she allowed other men to do the same without protection. I quickly pulled over to the side of the road, opened the door, and vomited. After I came to my senses, I knew exactly what I needed to do next. It took me a few minutes to clear my head enough to realize where I was and where the nearest hospital was. Surprisingly, I didn't get a single speeding ticket on the way there. I ran into the hospital and clinic, barely able to catch my breath. As I approached the front desk, I begged the receptionist to expedite my appointment, stressing how important it was. She clearly saw my concern and sympathetically said she would do her best. I sat in the waiting room for what seemed like hours, but in reality, it was only about 30 minutes. After I was called into the office, I explained to the doctor what had happened, almost throwing up again. He seemed genuinely concerned about my situation and recommended a full battery of tests immediately. I agreed, of course, and spent the rest of the visit undergoing various examinations and tests. The doctor told me that the results would be ready within 2 weeks and that he would call me when they arrived. I left my phone number, not wanting the call to come anywhere else, especially home. After the doctor's visit, I was still in a fog and couldn't think clearly enough to do anything other than get back to the hotel. I was angry, confused, hurt, and yes, scared. I vaguely remember getting to my room and opening a bottle of bourbon from the bar. The next morning, I woke up with the worst hangover of my life, seeing the empty bottle next to the bed. I was surprised that I was still alive. The evening came back to me in fragments as I slowly woke up. I remember sitting there, taking long sips from the bottle, thinking about what had happened to my life. I cried, angry at the world for putting me in this position. I cried thinking about what could happen if she gave me something. I became furious, thinking about everything. The thoughts in my head were not pleasant. I had never been a violent person, but the ideas I had that night were truly cruel. I put aside visions of hanging her in the garage and flaying her skin. That would be too merciful. I was going to make her suffer in ways she couldn't imagine without touching her in anger. Initially, I only wanted enough evidence to ensure she wouldn't get anything in the divorce. Now I wanted not only this, but also for her to suffer 1,000 times more than I did. I knew what I would use as leverage. 2 things were important to her: her family and her money. I would take both from her. Her parents were the best people I had ever met. They would give everything they could to help and never ask for anything in return. Her brothers and sisters were just like her parents. Where this disgusting behavior went astray, I have no idea. Her family was also extremely conservative, somewhere to the right of Jesse Helms. There were many heated family discussions where their views were clear. In their opinion, treason should be punished by hanging in the city square, and night and money should be punished by public disembowelment and then hanging. Imagine their surprise when they find out their daughter not only cheated but also slept with men for money. When it came to money, it was even simpler. I knew where it was. I would just pick it up when she was out of the house. What could she do? Call the police? After I showered and ate breakfast, I felt better. My plans for revenge took shape and replaced the sadness I had felt the day before. I walked out of the hotel feeling a little better now that I had an idea of what to do. I went back to the computer store and bought a high-end photo printer and several packs of photo paper before heading out to the strip club again. I sat down with Crystal and had a very long and honest conversation with her about everything that had happened yesterday. She was very glad that I went to the doctor and passed all the tests. She was even more pleased when I informed her that I would not put her at risk until I was sure I had a clean bill of health. The more we talked, the closer we became. We were like kids on a first date, pouring out everything that was on our minds. We had no reason to hold back. She told me about her controversial past, and some parts were not very good. I told her everything about mine. I don't know why or how, but we felt like we could really trust each other on a very deep level. Back at the hotel, I set up the new printer and looked through all the pictures I had taken and captured from the cameras. I enhanced each shot, making sure they showed her face clearly. I printed out the best ones, making multiple copies of each. I also visited dating sites I had missed earlier and printed out each of her profiles and photos. While I was online, I logged into each of the sites and printed out all the emails she had saved. I looked through the footage from the night and saw that she was entertaining two other groups of guys. The first group had 4 people, and the second had 7. I grabbed all the relevant images and printed them out, trying to control my anger. I had enough damning evidence to begin my plan at any moment, but I wanted more. I needed to make sure there was no doubt about who she was. I wanted to ensure she had no chance of getting out of this. I not only wanted to hurt her, I wanted to completely destroy her. I went back to Pussycat and sat with Crystal again, having a long conversation. I told her about my plans, and she approved of my ideas, even improving some of them. During the conversation, she was a sneaky little rascal, no doubt about it. She suggested that when I was ready to present my evidence, I should also send a copy of everything to the DA's office. As a criminal justice student, she was confident that authorities would do something, but she wasn't sure of the evidentiary value of photos and personal profiles from websites. At the very least, it would prompt some investigation, another knife to stick and twist. Crystal returned to the hotel with me after work, surprised by the luxury of my room. She was like a kid in a candy store, looking around the room with her eyes widening when she saw the bathtub. I told her she could use it if she wanted. Before I even finished speaking, I admit that it was difficult for me to contain myself. I began to care about her and didn't want to hurt her in any way, especially by passing on something I could get from her. As I was about to leave the room, she called out, "Wash me, please," in the voice of a little girl. If you've never bathed a stunningly beautiful girl, you've missed out on one of life's most rewarding experiences. I was in 7th heaven as I washed her from head to toe. As I lathered her up, I massaged her soft skin, not missing a single square inch of her front or back. Her reactions only fueled my desire. Listening to her sounds and whimpers as I washed and caressed her body was beyond description. Seeing and feeling her squirm under my touch was so hot, we could have set the room on fire. After I dried her off with a towel, making sure I didn't miss any spots, she reached over, hugged me, and lingered on my lips with a long kiss. I picked her up, carried her to the bed, and carefully laid her down. I made a point of keeping my clothes on as I slowly and gently explored every inch of her body with my hands. We lay and talked throughout the evening, opening up to each other even more. She told me about her dreams, desires, needs, goals, and passions. I shared everything I had. I didn't know why we were doing this or what it might lead to, but I really enjoyed the intimacy, the pure intimacy that I had never shared with another person. We got out of bed after a while, and she asked to see the setup on my computer that I had told her about. I logged into the home server and started showing her various cameras. I was a little nervous, afraid that she was entertaining someone again. I breathed a sigh of relief when I switched to the game room and found it empty. I switched cameras one by one, the last one being the master bedroom. I was amazed by what I saw. Crystal sighed and hugged me tightly as the scene became clear. There was a girl with long hair on the bed, my bed, surrounded by 12 guys. It looked like they were just finishing their session. She eventually got out of bed, and we watched as she opened an envelope on her nightstand and counted out $1,750. I was able to remain calm for a while. I then rewound the tape, captured the images, and printed them out, with Crystal hugging me the entire time. I checked the recording again and found another session earlier in the day, shortly after I was in the house. I captured and printed images from this humiliation. Finally, I couldn't hold it in any longer and burst into tears. I couldn't hide it. I couldn't hold it in anymore. Crystal led me onto the bed, lay next to me, held me in her arms, and whispered soothing words in my ear. I eventually fell asleep, completely emotionally exhausted. When I woke up the next morning, Crystal was still holding me. It's impossible to describe how good it felt. After I was awake enough to be somewhat sane, I reminded her that she was late for work. She told me she was taking the day off. She said I needed someone next to me, and I didn't argue. We had a very serious conversation over breakfast. Crystal was really concerned about my mental state. We agreed that it was time to do something. If I couldn't take it anymore, it was time to stop. There were just a few details left to iron out, and then it would be over. I admit that what I did next was probably pretty damn illegal. Ask me if I care. I fired up the computer, printed out the power of attorney, and forged her signature, giving me authority over all of our joint properties. I made a quick visit to my longtime lawyer and transferred everything we had in common into my name: the house, cars, cottage, real estate, and brokerage accounts. Surprisingly, it was relatively quick and painless. I also visited the bank and removed her name from all of our accounts, leaving one account for her with a balance of $1. I laughed to myself throughout the whole process. During my visit to the bank, I signed the necessary paperwork to cancel all of our credit cards in 2 days and received a new card and a brand new account. Finally, I visited my real estate agent and put the house on the market urgently. I could never live there again. With those details settled, it was time to use the overnight delivery service. I returned to the hotel after a quick stop at the office supply warehouse. Crystal helped me gather photos, profiles, and emails and put them in envelopes. I printed out address labels for her parents, 2 brothers, 3 sisters, the district attorney, the police chief, her church, 2 local newspapers, and half a dozen of her friends for whom I had addresses. We left the hotel and stopped at the first express delivery station we saw and sent the envelopes. I was so excited that I was practically jumping off the walls. I accepted that she was a dirty cheat and I was in the process of getting rid of her from my life for good, but I still felt weird doing this to someone I once loved. As I said earlier, I have never been a violent person. I've also never been a vindictive person. I wasn't used to doing something like this. I couldn't turn off all my emotions at once. Crystal noticed that I was in shock at what I was doing and reminded me in great detail why I needed to do it. The last point remained. We returned to the hotel and checked the cameras in the house, finding it empty. I rewound and saw that she had left about an hour ago, dressed to the nines. I told Crystal to wait here for me and that I would be back in about an hour. She wasn't happy to let me go alone. She wanted to be there in case I needed support. I assured her that I would be fine and left after a big hug and a tender kiss. I rushed through the city to the house and entered through the garage. I quickly walked into the office and opened the safe, finding it even more full than a few days ago. I emptied the safe into a large duffel bag and rushed back to the hotel. We laid out the money on one of the beds and counted it, then counted it again and again to make sure the final amount was just under $1 million. We were both completely stunned as we sat there looking at the stacks of bills. Later that night, it was especially funny to watch her come home, looking clearly tired after intimate, and go put the money in the safe. I have never heard anyone scream so loudly, nor have I heard anyone use such curse words. I had to laugh when she spent the entire night pacing the house and swearing like a sailor. If it was funny, what happened the next morning was just as funny. Her parents called her first. I couldn't hear their side of the conversation, but I could hear her trying to deny everything with a trembling voice. She finally threw the phone down, curled up in the middle of the floor, and cried. I almost felt sorry for her. Over the next few hours, the phone rang several more times. Each time it was someone who received one of the packages. Apparently, from what she said in the conversation, each time she tried to deny everything only to hang up on whoever she was talking to and go back to crying. I suddenly realized that I had forgotten to send copies to her herself. I quickly printed out everything I had, put it in an envelope, and called the courier service. I watched, half an hour later, as she opened the envelope. Her face turned pale, and she collapsed to the floor, shocked and dazed. I hoped she felt at least 10% of what I had been feeling the last few days. Weeks and months flew by after I exposed her for what she was. I kept in touch with her siblings, friends, and parents. Each of them expressed sympathy for what had happened and assured me that their doors would always be open to me. Nobody knew that I was the one who had exposed her, and it didn't matter. Finally, I received a call from the medical office with both good and bad news. I had nothing fatal or incurable. I took a number of medications for a while and eventually received a clean bill of health. I'm still being tested for things that don't show up right away and will continue to do so for a very long time. She was arrested and charged with an intim for money and money laundering. She had no means of defense and was easily convicted. She was given a very long prison sentence due to the brutality of her actions and the fact that she not only did not deny anything but also spoke in her own defense. Authorities were still trying to figure out where the money she was supposed to earn had gone. I only saw her once after I sent the envelopes, and that was in court for our divorce. She didn't contest anything, and the judge didn't award her anything. The house was sold within a few months. I hired movers to remove my personal belongings. I couldn't even think about entering that place again. Everything I didn't want was thrown into the trash. I thought about donating it to charity but didn't want to expose anyone to the filth that came with it. With the money I took from her and from the sale of the house, I had a very good starting capital. I bought a very nice, very large new house in another area. I paid off Crystal, Brittany, and Kayla's student loans without telling them and set up a fund to pay for their school and books until they graduated. Somehow, throughout all of this, Crystal and I fell deeply in love with each other. She moved into my new house a few months after this whole situation ended and has since turned it into a real home. We are planning to get married in a few months and couldn't be happier. The fact that she's a self-proclaimed accessible woman doesn't bother me. She is mine. Kayla and Brittany sometimes stop by to chat or for more intimate get-togethers. What do you think of our story today? I think it's a shame for the man who saw pictures of his wife in such a compromising way. What would your reaction be if you were the husband?